The Supermind as creator. Speed reading. A principle of active will of knowledge superior to man and creatrix of the world is damned by intermediate power, and state of being between that self position of the one and this flux of the many. This principle is not entirely aligned to us. It does not belong solely and incommunicably to a being who is entirely other than ourselves or to a state of existence from which we are mysteriously projected into birth, but also rejected and unable to return. Heaven seems to us to be seated on heights far above us, yet are they the heights of our own being and accessible to our tree. We cannot only infer and glimpse that truth, but we are capable of realizing it. We may by a progressive expanding or a sudden luminous self-transcendence mount up to the summits in unforgettable moments or dwell on them during hours or days of greatest superhuman experience. One it is again, there are doors of communication which we can keep always open or reopen even though they should constantly shut. But to dwell there permanently on this last and highest summit of the created and creative being is in the end the supreme ideal of every evolving human consciousness. One is not self-annihilation but self-perfection. For as we have seen, this is the original idea and the final harmony unto truth, which our gradual self-expression in the world returns and which it is meant to achieve. Still, we may doubt whether it is possible, now or at all, to give any account of this state to the human intellect or to utilize in any communicable and organizable way its divine workings for the elevation of our human knowledge and action. The doubt does not arise solely from the rarity or dubiety of any known phenomena that would betray a human working of this divine faculty, or from the remoteness which separates this action from the experience and verifiable knowledge of ordinary humanity. It is strongly suggested also by the apparent contradiction in both essential operation between human mentality and the divine supermind. And certainly, if this consciousness had no relation at all to mind or nor anywhere any identity with the mental being, it would be quite impossible to give any account of it to our human motions. Or, if it were in its nature only vision in knowledge and not at all dynamic power of knowledge, we could hope to attain by its contact a beatific state of mental illumination, but not a greater light and power for the works of the world. But since this consciousness is creatrix of the world, it must be not only state of knowledge but power of knowledge, and not only a will to light and vision but a will to power and works. And since this mind too is created of it, mind must be a development by illumination out of this primal faculty, and this meditative act of supreme consciousness mind must therefore be capable of resolving itself back into it through a reverse development by expansion. For always, mind must be identical with Supermind in essence and conceal in itself the potentiality of Supermind, however different or even contrary it may have been in its actual forms and subtle modes of operation. It may not then be an irrational or unprofitable strive attempt to strive by the method of comparison and contrast towards some idea of the supermind from the standpoint and in the terms of our intellectual knowledge. The idea, the terms, may well be inadequate and yet still serve as a finger of light pointing us to onwards on a way which to some distance at least we may tread. Moreover, it is possible for mind to rise beyond itself into certain heights or planes of consciousness which receive into themselves a modified light or power of the supramental consciousness and know that by an illumination, intuition, or a direct contact or experience. Although to live in it and see and act from it is a victory that has not yet been made humanly possible. And first, we may pause a moment and ask ourselves whether no light can be found from the past which will guide us towards these ill-explored domains. We need a name and we need a starting point, for we have called this state of consciousness the supermind. But the word is ambiguous since it may be taken in the sense of mind itself, super-eminent and lifted above ordinary mentality, but not radically changed. Or on the contrary, it may bear the sense of all that is beyond mind and therefore assume a too extensive comprehensiveness which would bring in even the ineffable itself. A subsidiary description is required which will more accurately limit its significance. It is the cryptic verses of the Veda that help us here, for they contain, though conceal, the gospel of the divine and immortal supermind, and through the world some illuminating flashes come to us. We can see through these utterances the constitution of the supermind as a vastness beyond the ordinary firmaments of our consciousness, in which truth of being is luminously one with all that expresses it and assures inevitably truth of vision, formulation, arrangement, word, act, and movement, and therefore truth also of result of movement, a result of action and expression, infallible ordinance of law, of vast all comprehensiveness, luminous truth and harmony of being in that vastness, and not a vague chaos or lost obscurity. The truth of law and act and knowledge expressive of that harmonious truth of being. These seem to be the essential terms of the Vedic description. The gods, who in the highest secret entity or powers of the supermind, born of it, seated in it, as in their proper home, or in their knowledge, truth conscious, and their action possessed of the seer will, their conscious force turned towards works and creation is possessed and guided by a perfect and direct knowledge of the thing to be done and its essence and its law, a knowledge which determines only effective willpower that does not deviate or falter in its process or in its result, but expresses and fulfills spontaneously and inevitably in the act that which has been seen in the vision. A light is here one with force, the vibrations of knowledge with the rhythm of the will, and both are one, perfectly and without seeking, groping, or efforts over the assured result. The divine nature has a double power, a spontaneous self-formulation and a self-arrangement which dwells naturally out of the essence of the thing manifested and expresses its original truth and the self-force of a light inherent in the thing itself and the source of its spontaneous and inevitable self-arrangement. But there are subordinate but important details. The Vedics seem to speak of two primary faculties of truth conscious soul. They are sight and hearing, by which is intended direct operations of an inherent knowledge describable as truth vision and truth audition and reflected from far off in our human mentality by the faculties of revelation and inspiration. Besides, a distinction seems to be made in the operations of the supermind between knowledge by comprehending and pervading consciousness, which is very near to subjective knowledge by identity and knowledge by projecting, comprehending, apprehending consciousness, which is the beginning of objective cognition. These are the Vedic clues, and we may accept from this ancient experience a subsidiary term truth consciousness to delimit the connotation of the more elastic phrase supermind. Obviously, accounts that such a consciousness, described by such characteristics, must be an intermediate formulation which refers back to a term above it and forward to another below it. Obviously, at the same time that it is evidently the link and means by which the inferior develops out of the superior and should equally be the link and means by which it may develop back again towards its source. The term above is the unitary and indivisible consciousness of pure Satchidana in which there are no separating distinctions. The term below is the analytic or dividing consciousness of mind which can only know by separation and distinction and has at the most a vague and secondary apprehension of unity and infinity. For though it can synthesize its divisions, it cannot arrive at a true totality. Between them is this comprehensive and creative consciousness. By its power of pervading and intimately comprehending knowledge, the child of that self-awareness by identity, which is the poise of the Brahman, and it by its power of projecting, confronting, apprehending knowledge, parent of that awareness by distinction, which is the process of the mind. Above, the formula of the one eternally stable and immutable. Below, the formula of the many which eternally immutable seeks but hardly finds in the flux of things a firm and immutable standing point, between the seed of alternatives, of all that is bion, of all that becomes many in one and yet remains one in many, because it was originally one that it always potentially many, but one that is always potentially many. This intermediary term is therefore the beginning and end of all creation and arrangement, the alpha and the omega, the starting point of all differentiation, the instrument of all unification, originative, executive, and consummative of all realized or realizable harmonies. It has the knowledge of the one, but is able to draw out of the one its hidden multitudes. It manifests the many, but does not lose itself in the differentiations. And shall we not say that its very existence point back to something beyond our supreme perception of the ineffable unity, as something ineffable and mentally inconceivable, not because of its unity and indivisibility, but because of its freedom from even these formulations of our mind, something beyond both unity and multiplicity. That would be that absolute and real which justifies to us both our knowledge of God and our knowledge of the world. But these terms are large and difficult to grasp. Let us come to precisions. We speak of the one as Satchidananda, but in the very description we posit three entities and unite them to arrive at a trinity, whose existence, consciousness, bliss, and then we say they are one. It is a process of the mind, but for the Unitarian consciousness, such a process is inadmissible. Existence is consciousness, and there can be no distinction between them. Consciousness is bliss, and there can be no distinction between them. And since there is not even this differentiation, there can be no world. If that is the sole reality, then world is not then never existed and can never have been conceived. For indivisible consciousness is undivided consciousness and cannot originate division and differentiation. But this is reductio ad absurdum. We cannot admit and unless we are content to base everything upon an impossible paradox and an unreconciled antithesis. On the other hand, mind can conceive with precision division as real. It can conceive a synthetic totality of the finite extending itself indefinitely. It can grasp aggregates of divided things and the sameness underlying them, but the ultimate unity and absolute infinity are to its conscience of things, abstract notions and unseizable quantities. not something that is real to its grasp, much less something that is alone real. Here is, therefore, the very opposite term to the Unitarian consciousness. We have, confronting the essential and indivisible unity, an essential multiplicity which cannot arrive at unity without abolishing itself, and in the very act of confessing that it could never really have existed, yet it was. For it is this that has found unity and abolished itself. And again we have a reductio ad absurdum, or rebuilding the violent paradox, which seeks to convince that thought by stunning it and the irreconciled and irreconcilable antithesis. The difficulty in its lower term disappears if we realize that mind is only a preparatory form of our consciousness. Mind is an instrument of analysis and synthesis, but not of essential knowledge. Its function is to cut out something vaguely from the unknown thing in itself and call this measurement or delimitation of it at the whole, and again to analyze the whole into its parts, which it regards as separate mental objects. It is only the parts and accidents that the mind can see definitely, and after its own fashion know of the whole. Its only definite idea is an assemblage of parts or a totality of properties and accidents, the whole not seen as a part of something else or in its own parts. Properties and accidents is to the mind no more than a vague perception. Only when it is analyzed and put by itself as a separate constituted object, a totality in a larger totality, can mind say of itself, this know I know, and really it does not know. I know it knows only its own analysis of the object and the idea it has formed of it by a synthesis of the separate parts and properties that it has seen. That it is its characteristic power, its sure function ceases. And if you would have greater, a profounder and a real knowledge, a knowledge and not an intense but formless sentiment such as comes sometimes to certain deep but inarticulate parts of our mentality. Mind has to make room for another consciousness which will fulfill mind by transcending it or reverse and so rectify its operation after leaping beyond it. The summit of mental knowledge is only a vaulting board from which that leap can be taken. The utmost mission of mind is to train our obscure consciousness which has emerged out of the dark prison of matter, to enlighten its blind instincts, random intuitions, vague perceptions, until it shall become capable of this greater light and this higher ascension. Mind is a passage but not a culmination. On the other hand, the Unitarian consciousness or indivisible unity cannot be that impossible entity, a thing without contents out of which all contents are issued and into which they disappear and become annihilated. It must be an original self-concept in which all is contained but in another manner than this temporal and spatial manifestation. That which is thus concentrated itself is the utterly ineffable and inconceivable existence which the nihilist images to his mind as negative void of all that we know and or, but the transcendentalist or the equal reason may image to his mind as the positive but indistinguishable reality of all that we know and are. In the beginning, says the Vedanta, was the one existence without a second, but before and after the beginning, now, forever and beyond. Time is that which we cannot describe even as the one, even when we say that nothing but that is. What we can be aware of is first its original self-concentration which we endeavor to realize as the indivisible one. Secondly, the diffusion and apparent disintegration of all that was considered in its unity, which is the mind's conception of the universe. And thirdly, its firm self-extension of the truth consciousness which contains and upholds the diffusion and prevents it from being a real disintegration. Of mind is unity in all utmost diversity and stability in utmost mutability. Insists on harmony in the appearance of all pervading strife and collision, keeps eternal cosmos where mind would arrive only at a chaos eternally attempting to form itself. This is the supermind, the truth consciousness, the real idea which knows itself and all that it becomes. Supermind is the vast self-extension of the Brahman. Few. Supermind is a self-extension of the Brahman that contains and develops. By the idea it develops the triune principle of existence, consciousness, and plus sort of their indivisible unity. It differentiates them, but it does not divide. It establishes eternity, not arriving like the mind from the three to one, but manifesting the three out of the one. For it manifests and develops, and it maintaining them in the unity. For it knows and contains. By the differentiation it is able to bring forward one or other of them as the effective deity which contains the others involved or explicit in itself, and this process it makes the foundation of all other differentiation, and it acts by the same operation of all the principles and possibilities which it evolves out of this all constituent trinity. It possesses the power of development or evolution, of making explicit, and that power carries with it the other power of involution, of envelopment, of making implicit. In a sense, the whole of creation may be said to be a movement between two involutions, spirit in which all is involved, and out of which all evolves downward to the other pole of matter, matter in which also all is involved, and out of which all evolves upwards to the other pole of spirit. And thus the whole process of differentiation by the right real idea. Reality of the universe is a putting forward of principles, forces, forms which contain for the comprehending consciousness all the rest of existence with them, and friend the apprehending consciousness with all the rest of existence, implicit behind them. Therefore, all is in each in as well as each in all. Therefore, every state of things implies in itself all the infinity of various possibilities, but is kept to one law of process and result by the will, and that is to say, by the knowledge force of the conscious being who is manifesting himself and who, sure of the idea in himself, predetermines by its own forms and movements. The seed is the truth of its own being, which is self-existence sees in itself. The resultant of that seed of self-vision of that is the truth of self-action, the natural law of development, formation, and functioning, which follows inevitably upon the self-vision and keeps to the processes involved in the original truth. All nature is simply then the seed will, the knowledge force of the conscious being at work to evolve in force and form all the inevitable truth of the idea into which it has originally grown itself. This conception of the idea points us to the essential contrast between our man consciousness and the truth consciousness. We regard thought as a thing separate from existence, abstract, unsubstantial, different from reality, something which appears one knows not whence and detaches itself from objective reality in order to observe, understand, and judge it. For so it seems, and therefore it is to our all dividing, all analyzing mentality. The first business of mind is to render discrete, to make fissures much more than to discern. And so it has made this paralyzing fissure between thought and reality. But in Supermind, all being is consciousness, all consciousness is of being. And the idea, a pregnant vibration of consciousness, is equally a vibration of being pregnant of itself. It is an initial coming out in creative self-knowledge of that which lay concentrated in uncreative self-awareness. It comes out as idea, that is a reality, and it is that reality of the idea which evolves itself, always by its own power and consciousness of itself, always self-conscious, always self-developing by the will inherent in the idea, always self-realizing by the knowledge ingrained in its every impulsion. This is the truth of all creation, of all evolution. In Supermind going, consciousness of knowledge and consciousness of will are not divided as they seem to be in our mental operations. They are eternity, one moment with three effective aspects, each has its own effect. A being gives the effect of substance, consciousness the effect of knowledge, of the self-guiding and shaping idea of comprehension and apprehension. A will gives the effect of self-fulfilling force, but the idea is only the light of the reality illumining itself. It is not mental thought nor imagination, but effective self-awareness. It is real idea. In Supermind knowledge, in the idea is not diverse from will in the idea, but one with it. Just as it is not different from being or substance, but is one with the being, a luminous power of the substance. As the power of burning light is not different from the substance of the fire, so the power of idea is not different from the substance of the being, which works itself out in the idea and its development. In our mentality, all are different. We have an idea and a will according to the idea, or an impulsion of will and an idea detaching itself from it. But we differentiate effectually the idea from the will, and both from ourselves. I am. The idea is mysterious abstraction that appears in me. The will is another mystery, a force nearer to concreteness, though not concrete, but always something that is not myself, something that I have or get or am seized with, but I am not. I make a gulf also between my will, its means, and the effect. For these I regard as concrete realities outside and other than myself. Therefore, neither myself nor the idea nor the will in me are self-effective. The idea may fall away from me, the will may fail, the means may be lacking. I myself, by any or all of this lacunae, may remain unfulfilled. But in the Supermind, there is no such paralyzing division, because knowledge is not self-divided, force is not self-divided, being is not self-divided as in the mind. They are neither broken in themselves nor diverse from each other. For the Supermind is the vast. It starts from the unity, not division. It is primarily comprehensive. Differentiation is only its secondary act. Therefore, whatever be the truth of being expressed, the idea corresponds to it exactly. The will force to the idea, force being only power of the consciousness, and the result to the will. Nor does the idea clash with other ideas, the will or force with other will or force, as in man and this world. For there is one vast consciousness which contains and relates all ideas in itself as its own ideas. One vast will which contains and relates all energies in itself as its own energies. It holds back this, advances that other, but according to its own preconceiving idea will. This is the justification of the current religious notions of the omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence of the divine being. Far from being an irrational imagination, they are perfectly rational and in no way contradict either the logic of a comprehensive philosophy or indications of observations or experience. The error is to make an unbridgeable gulf between God and man, Brahman and the world. That error elevates an actual and practical differentiation in being, consciousness, and falls into an essential division. But this aspect of the question we shall touch upon afterwards. At present, we have arrived at an affirmation and some conception of the divine and creative supermind in which all is one in being, consciousness, a will and delight, yet with an infinite capacity of differentiation that deploys but does not destroy the unity, in which truth is the substance and truth rises in the idea and truth comes out in the form, and there is one truth of knowledge and will, one truth of self-fulfillment and therefore of delight. For all self-fulfillment is satisfaction of being, therefore, always, in all mutations and combinations, a self-existent and inalienable harmony.